Howdy, howdy, howdy. How's my people? Hope you guys are doing great. It's 4:30 in the morning, pitch black dark outside, and my rooster is seeing the light from this office and he's crowing like crazy. He never shuts up. He's a good boy though. I love him. Hey, I want to talk about one thing before we get cranking on this video. You all know I have a Teespring store. You can see it right below this video. It's a little banner. You'll see a bunch of t-shirts and coffee mugs and things. We've redone that store and added a lot of new apparel and accessories that you might be interested in. We've got apparel for men, women, and children now. There are several designs. We've got more to come in the future. We've got t-shirts with illustrations on the back and the front. Again, t-shirts, long sleeve tees, hoodies, sweatshirts. 2 styles of women's t-shirts, maybe 3, I can't remember, all in several colors and sizes. Coffee mugs, phone cases, stickers. We have some really cool stickers on there. I was selling stickers on my own just for PayPal payments. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm offering all the stickers through Teesprings, and I think the quality is good and we're able to do some different things on that. So anyway, nobody gets rich off of Teespring, but it helps the channel. And I know I've talked about this before, but I don't take donations, but I'd like to sell you something. I'm not gonna lie about that. I think we've got items in that store with real creative illustrations, just in other words, cool Bigfoot shirts that I think you're gonna like, and we've got more coming. So take a look at that, and if you're interested in that, go ahead and buy it. Second thing I wanted to talk about is one of the stories in this video is, well, let me back up. About a month ago, I got an email from a teacher up in the Ozarks, northwest Arkansas, southwest Missouri, I'm not sure. But she had heard a video that I did where I offered to narrate stories by young people, no matter what the story is, true or fiction. I wanted them to use their imagination and go through an exercise in creative writing. And if they wanted to hear it in a video and let 5,000 or 10,000 other people hear it, they were welcome to do that. We got a little bit of a response from that. We got 2 stories. Milo, he wrote the sweetest story. I don't remember what video it's in, but he wrote a great story. And then I think her name was Sarah. She wrote, I did a whole video just with her story. Great fun thing to do. And I've got 5 stories, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop 1 in the next 5 videos. So over the next 5 videos, there's going to be one of these boys' stories in the video. And let me say now, before I get into the video, boys, you guys did a great job. You've got great imaginations, and I love the stories, and I can tell they're written by boys because they're adventure, action-packed. They're just great. And I want you, the audience, please just leave nice comments for these boys. Please don't leave any of those stupid comments about fiction. Just don't do that. That's crazy. You know, out of 1,000 comments that I get, there may only be 1 or 2 that are negative, and they're usually about, you don't need to put fiction on your channel. You go do that on your channel. I'm going to do what I think is right and what I think is entertaining on my channel. So let's all be nice. Let's use good manners. Don't be rude. If you feel compelled to leave a nasty comment, go leave one on someone else's channel. Don't do it on this one. Everybody in the comments on this channel are just super nice people. I mean, it's unbelievable how nice the comments are that we get. So don't do it. I don't want those boys to read those comments and be discouraged. So boys, great job. Everybody who wrote stories in this particular video did a great job. So I want you guys to sit back, fix you a glass of sweet tea or pour you a cup of coffee. It's kind of a long video, and enjoy these stories because they're great. All right, here we go. All right. Sorry to take up so much time on the front end there. Let's get right into a story. This was emailed to me by Cindy Lou. Cindy Lou. I like that name. As a child growing up, I often remembered my mom telling us that there are things out in the woods that can't be explained. To my knowledge, we never encountered any of that, but as a Girl Scout camping out, we often heard strange noises at night that would keep us awake until we fell asleep from exhaustion. Young County was named after my great-great-great-grandfather. He lived east of Possum Kingdom Lake and was often in the Red River area fighting or chasing bad guys in the mid-1800s. I remember hearing that there were things out there in that area that couldn't be explained, and if that didn't get you, the quicksand would. As I grew older, I blew it off as folklore, and I never really paid much attention to it. Fast forward to the 1990s, actually about 20 years ago now, and I ran across your channel, and I remembered what was told to me that made me believe that there really was something out there. Well, she didn't find my channel in the 90s, but I think I know what she's saying. It was probably 1999 or close to that date, and I had a mailing group on Yahoo, and we had planned on getting together for a face-to-face camping trip at a local lake. I made the reservations and got there early to set up camp and started the roast and the veggies cooking, and I eagerly awaited the few members that had RSVP'd that they would be there. Finally, after dark, one of the members arrived, and we sat there eating and wondering why the other couple of guys didn't show, and we started talking. The member that did show up was in his mid to late 60s, it appeared, and I was in my late 40s. We discussed what we thought about the politics at the time and how we saw our country going and what we'd do differently if given the chance. Well, basically small talk to get through the awkwardness of the situation. Then the man started telling me about how he had been in Vietnam and he had seen a lot, how he had testified in a congressional investigation on something that he had knowledge about, and how he had received death threats. He felt a bit safer now. Well, frankly, I listened to his stories and didn't really believe much of what he said, but didn't want to be disrespectful, so I asked basic questions and I just listened. I remember him saying he didn't originally think he'd survive Vietnam, but he did. Then he didn't think after testifying to Congress about his knowledge of certain events, which led to subsequent death threats, that he'd survive that, but he did. Then, many years later, he said he went on a camping or hunting trip in what he called the thicket of East Texas, and he said that he was scared more there than he ever was in Vietnam or after testifying to Congress. I remember him telling the story and watching him describe what he saw and felt and how he left the area, and it made the hairs on my entire body stand up. I remember feeling my stomach knot up as I heard his voice crack as he told it. At that point, even though I had not believed anything previously that he had told me, I wholeheartedly believed what he said about his encounter in the thicket of East Texas. I remember him saying that he was just needing to get away from it all, so he loaded up his pickup truck with enough camping gear for a few days and started up to an area that he had knowledge of and had been to many times before. I think he said he parked and then walked up into the woods a while and then found a clearing enough to set up camp and then went exploring the area. I can't remember how long he said he was there before he came across something that was much larger than he was, had a very strong musky odor, and he said he was so scared that he felt the energy of death all around him, and that he didn't think he would be able to get away. He said that he considered trying to go back to his gear, but that wasn't the safest route. He said that the only way to escape was to go in another direction, away from where his gear and his camp was and from where his vehicle was. So he took that route and ran and traveled for several miles until he heard noise from a roadway and followed the noise and was able to get a ride back to his home. He said he called a few friends to go back with him during the daylight to retrieve his truck and camping gear, and with several of his friends they went back to get the truck. However, he didn't want to risk another encounter with whatever it was, so he abandoned his camp and gear and he left. He said he remembered his friends were eager to go back there with him because they wanted to see what it was that scared a man such as he was with all he'd been through, but he just couldn't bring himself to go deeper into the thicket, even with backup. He said they didn't see anything that day, but didn't investigate that much further into the woods. He said he had not gone back and wasn't sure that he would. I remember that he and I sat and ate roast and vegetables literally until we could not eat another bite. We sat up most of the night talking, and although I had not believed what he had told me prior to his Bigfoot encounter, there was no doubt in my mind that he had seen something that totally scared him to death, and even though it had been probably 15 years or so since his encounter, you could tell by his voice and his wording that the story he was telling was real, and that he was really scared when it occurred, and he still was. Just telling it scared him. I remember him saying that his health was failing and that he had pretty much stuck to himself and very few friends and didn't venture out of his small circle. I asked him why on earth he would come to a camping trip to meet up with people he didn't know and to meet up with a situation that was uncertain, and he said that he just felt it was time to take a risk and that I sounded like I wasn't a threat and had my heart in the right place. I thanked him for trusting me enough to come and staying even though we were the only ones that made it in before the gates were locked, and for telling me his stories. I thought he was a really nice man, and he had been a perfect gentleman, and I enjoyed meeting him, although I had not believed most of what he told me. And I didn't give him any signs that I didn't. I just listened and politely asked a few basic questions and nodded. As soon as I returned home that day, I remember throwing my camping gear aside and going straight to the computer to research what he told me about testifying to Congress. I researched his name and found out what he had said that he had done was correct. He had testified to Congress certain events that he had knowledge of and was an acquaintance of someone high-ranking that he had discussed. I remember sitting back and rethinking the conclusion that I had previously held about him and realizing that if he had really been in Vietnam and testified to Congress, then what he said about the Bigfoot encounter was probably also correct and true. So that would explain why his voice changed while telling his story and why the hair stood up straight up all over my body when he told it. He did indeed meet up with a Bigfoot in our East Texas thicket. After the camping trip, we kept in contact a few times over the years, and I found out a few years ago that he had passed away. I'm pretty sure that there wasn't many other people other than his close friends at the time that he told his story to, so that's why I'm telling it for him here. This was a grown man, a war veteran who had seen a lot, stammering and shuddering like a schoolgirl at the very memory of what he had encountered in the thickets of East Texas. And he had to tell someone who would not judge him, a complete stranger, in hopes that he could somehow come to terms with it. And I, for one, believe him, and I still believe that they're out there. And then she writes, R.I.P., rest in peace, W.R., which are apparently his initials. Cindy from North Texas. Cindy, I got this story several months ago. It was during a time when I was so busy. I was getting a lot of emails at the time, and I just couldn't go through them. And I'm going back through them now, finding some that I missed. And I'm sorry I missed this one, but I told you all that I'm going to get every story that I get in here that I can read on this channel, and I'm going to do what I say. But regarding this story, you got his story out, Cindy Lou. It's a wonderful thing you did, and I'm glad I found it. WR's story is out there now. We don't have many details, and I have a couple of questions like, did he ever go get his car? Did he ever go get his gear? It's a great story, and I suppose when people have encounters with these things, they do get terrified, and especially walking through the woods not knowing where you're going. That's the scariest part about that story, is him walking through the woods not really knowing where he's going to pop out. And obviously this thing maybe was tracking him, but that's kind of spooky. It's kind of like a Halloween story. Okay, Cindy, thank you so much. Okay, this is the first video of the 5 next videos that I'm going to drop a story written by a teenage boy from, I think, Arkansas. I think that's where they live. And I just want to speak directly to him. You did a great job writing this story. You have a great imagination, but you keep writing, man. You're doing good. And over the next 5 videos, or 4 after this one, I think you all are going to really be impressed with the imagination and the writing skills of these young men. They did a great job. Y'all need to give your teacher a hug for getting you into this. It's a great exercise in creative writing. And let me tell you something. If you can learn to write well, that means you're going to learn to speak well. And those are skills that are going to carry you through the rest of your life. If you can learn to speak well and communicate well with people, which is what happens when you learn to write, you are in the top 20% of teenagers graduating high school. I just want you to know that. You don't have to put out any special effort. Writing is fun. Keep going, man. Keep writing. All right, here is your story. Me, Fred, and the Yeti. Fred was a 4'3" short, skinny country boy. I bet he didn't even weigh 100 pounds. Fred really loved to go hunting and fishing and doing all sorts of outdoor stuff, but Fred did not seem like the outdoor type because every time he saw a snake or a spider, he would run and scream like a girl. Fred was a pretty cool guy. He had been my friend since the 90s. We met in the Northwest Caves in the middle of the Canadian woods. I was hunting for deer and went into his cave and found that I thought it was empty. That's when I stumbled onto my soon-to-be lifelong friend. When I met Fred, I knew we would become best friends, and when we started to talk, the more I realized that we both like a lot of the same things. We like hunting, fishing, and so on. When Fred invited me to his house, I eagerly accepted. He lived in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees and wildlife. It was kind of cool, but at the same time, it gave me the chills. Fred and I were sitting on the couch looking at the birds and the animals. About 15 minutes passed and I was kind of getting bored, so I decided to head back to my house, and when I got to my house, I felt like something wasn't right. When I went outside, it was snowing pretty hard, and then I saw a white creature in the distance. It was like 8 feet tall, and it was really hairy, and it was slowly coming my way. I quickly went inside to grab my gun, but it wasn't where I thought I had left it. It was then that I realized I had left it at Fred's house, and all I had was a hunting knife, and this thing was over 8 feet tall. At first, I thought it was over for me, but I remembered that I had a handgun under my bed. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. When I looked out my window, I thought that it would have already made it over here, but it was gone. I was so scared that night, I only got 2 hours sleep. When I woke the next morning, it was a type of day to just go hiking, so I drove my Jeep to Fred's and asked if he wanted to go. He said no, maybe next time. When I got to the trail, I realized that I had a flat tire, so I went to get the spare, but the spare was gone. It took nearly all day to get another tire, take it back to my truck, and change the flat. But I was going to hike, and that's what I planned on doing, so I took off on the trail. In about 15 minutes, it was getting dark, and I was not a fan of being out in the middle of nowhere in the dark, and I didn't have a flashlight. So I decided to go back, but then I saw the same white creature that I had seen yesterday. So I took off running back to my truck. It took me 10 minutes, but I was not going to stop running. When I got back to my truck, I saw the same creature, and I jumped in my truck and I took off as fast as I could. I don't know what that mysterious creature was. I just had to tell Fred, but I was worried that he wouldn't believe me, so I just went home. When I got home, my house was destroyed, and I found a piece of white furry hair on the floor, and I realized that it was that beast. How could a creature run 15 miles from the trail all the way to my house? So that night, I stayed at Fred's house. I told him about the mysterious creature, and he said that he had seen it often. And he said that if he wants something, he isn't going to stop until he gets what he wants. And I looked at Fred and said, but he's been following me, and I see him everywhere I go now. At that moment, I was truly scared for my life. So when I went to bed that night, I just couldn't stop thinking about this creature. It was the longest night of my life, but the white creature didn't come around. When morning came, I got up. I got my gun and went straight to my truck. I went back to my house to pack my things and leave this place, but when I got there, I saw the creature and it was looking right at me. So when I tried to shoot it, it was like it knew what I was going to do because it did not get hit. It ducked behind a tree. It wasn't scared because right then it started running towards me, making a deep growling noise. It looked mad, and it was the fastest animal that I had seen in my entire life. When I shot at it again, I hit it. Then again, and then the fourth time. By now, it was at a slow pace, and like Fred said, what it wants, it's going to get. I thought I had it in the bag, but I was wrong. It was only 20 feet in front of me and still coming at me. When it was very close, I just collapsed from fear. When I woke, I had no idea where I was or where the beast had taken me. I tried to call Fred on my cell, but my cell didn't work. I had to get out of there as fast as I could, so I started walking. I had no idea which way to go, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I kept hearing his death-defying scream, and I knew what that was, so I started to run. That's when I saw it. It was coming for me as fast as it could, and I had nothing to defend myself with, so my first reaction was to climb up a tall tree, and hopefully it couldn't climb trees. But guess what? It could climb them, but it sure would shake them with all its might, and the whole tree just came down, and I was unconscious again. But this time when I woke up, the creature was standing right there, and then all I could do was lay there in fear. Boom! The creature got shot. I could see fresh wound open up in its chest. Who was shooting? Who had come to my rescue? It was Fred. He had heard the scream and knew exactly what it was. Then the creature got shot again, and then one more time, and finally he fell over. I had to get a closer look at this thing. Fred was already standing over it with a big smile on his face. Then it just sprang to its feet and threw Fred against a tree. It was just about to come for me, and then it just looked at me and ran off. I don't understand what stopped him from killing me to this day. When I went to check on Fred, I checked his pulse. Fred was gone. Fred had given his life to save me. I had a few minor injuries, but not too serious, so I was in the hospital for a few days. When I got home, I just went to bed, and I never thought about it again, except on those cold, dark, snowy nights when I hear strange screams echoing through the trees. The end. This next story is really good. It's kind of funny and scary. I think you all are going to enjoy it. The man wants to stay anonymous. To start with, I like to keep my name and location private. I'm a teacher at a local high school. You can call me Mike, and I live in a small town next to a state park. The park is mostly on the east side of the highway, but there's a back road that exits on the west and branches off one way to a campground area. The other runs through for several miles to the town, where it rejoins the highway. During the off-season, nobody much uses this route except for locals taking a shortcut, and occasionally other folks who take the wrong turn and end up here by mistake. What I'm going to tell you happened a few years back on a weekend in October. I had been visiting my sister, my brother-in-law, and my 9-year-old nephew who live about 50 miles north of here, and I was driving home in my pickup late in the afternoon. The sun was getting low, but the light was good enough to see clearly. I was still chuckling about all the BS my nephew had been telling me. He'd been to camp for the first time that summer, and he had a whole slew of monster stories that the other kids had been scaring the daylights out of the younger kids with. He swore they were all true. Dogman, Bigfoot, and some others that I had never heard of. like the chubby cobra and the Winnebago. I told him I didn't know anything about chubby cobras, but some folks down the road from me used to have a Winnebago. I don't think he believed me. Oh, that's good. Anyhow, I turned off the highway and was shortcutting through the park. As I came around the bend, there was a white Volkswagen Rabbit on the opposite side just off the road and resting in a shallow ditch. I could see a man and a woman in the front seat and a couple of kids in the back. They were all just sitting there like they were frozen. I pulled to a stop and was getting out to offer to help when all of a sudden something large, dark, and hairy ambled around from the other side of the car. What? My first thought was it was a bear, and I regretted not having my rifle with me. A warning shot or two would have scared it off. Then it stood up on its hind legs, reached for a windshield wiper, wrenched it off, and chomped down on it. That's when I saw that it wasn't a bear. Its head resembled a dog or a wolf. Its paws were elongated, more like hands. Its shaggy coat was gray and black brindle color. It had a long bushy tail, and it was about 6 feet tall, standing upright. Whatever it was, it obviously didn't care for the taste of the wiper and tossed it to the ground. Then it proceeded to circle the car, returning to all fours and sniffing each tire in turn, licking the back window and scratching at the license plate as though it was puzzled about what sort of object a car might be, checking to see if any part of it was edible. Now I was sitting there just as frozen as the folks in the car when a black Jeep Wrangler screeched to a halt behind me and a woman jumped out. She was small, blonde, 30-ish, and she sprinted across the road towards this thing, which reared up on its hind legs and took a couple of steps in her direction. "Sit," she commanded. It sat. "Stay," and it stayed. "That's a good boy." She shook a finger under its nose. "You mustn't chase cars. Do you understand? Someone could get hurt. Now off you go." It got back up. It trotted off into the woods. She climbed back into her Jeep, muttering something about irresponsible dog owners, and then she drove away. This is blowing me away. After I'd helped the people to get their car back on the road, we went our separate ways without saying much to each other. I guess the whole thing seemed sort of unreal. And to this day, I still can't decide which part of it was more so, the dog man or the dog lady. I kind of regret not getting her license number, though. I have a Rottweiler pup that I sure could use some help with. He's been kicked out of 2 obedience classes, and I'll bet she could straighten him out pretty quick. Oh, man. You know, in some ways, that's really funny, but in another way, it's just like terrifying. Oh, my gosh. I'm just not even... that could be a movie. That's like a short 30-minute movie or something. That is so cool. This is another story that I had passed over and missed, and going back through my Gmail account, I'm finding a lot of stories that I missed, and oh man, looks like I missed some good ones. So hey, we've got stories and stories and stories coming up. So I want to thank the writer. I hope he's still listening to the channel because this was exceptional. Thank you, sir. Oh man, this video is packed with great stories. You know, I breeze through them before I start to narrate them, but once I get into it, I'm not real super familiar with them. I just start reading them, and these are great. This last one is awesome. It's a hoax gone bad. I think you're going to find it very interesting. The email is sent by Dusty. He says, "This may not fit the profile of your channel, and if not, just disregard it. But it's been indelibly etched into my mind for well over 50 years, so perhaps your listeners will find it interesting. I was camping with 4 other individuals on Black Lake in British Columbia a number of years ago. I was in a tent in my sleeping bag, which was on the ground. I was awoken by heavy footsteps and deep grunts at about 1 a.m. The impact of the footfalls actually shook the ground due to their close proximity to my tent. I could hear our gear being scattered around, and soon a series of depressions started poking into the tent from the outside. There was more than one because you could hear the other guy's equipment and pans being knocked around a short distance away as well. Grizzlies, I thought. Maybe 3. My 12-gauge Browning Auto was lying next to me loaded with rifle slugs for just such an occasion. I expected to see claws coming through the tent wall at any second, but I could not even begin to contemplate firing through a tent wall, and here's why. Me and 4 friends decided to do some varmint calling in the mountains of California. We were all in high school and about 17 years old. I drove my 1953 Buick up a dirt road into the woods above Lake Isabella. Today, some 40 years later, I have utterly no idea where that was. Back then, there were no lightweight tents or high-tech gear to speak of. We pulled off the dirt road at a wide spot, hiked into the woods, and set up our huge Coleman 6-man canvas tent. A gas lantern was hung in the middle, and we hunkered down waiting for 0 dark 30 to head off for our adventure. 3 of us were experienced hunters even at that young age, and I had dispatched numerous quail, chukar, grouse, and ducks up to that point in my life, so my young reflexes had already been well honed. My friend Fred and I were on opposite sides of the tent, just laying there waiting for it to get good and dark. Fred was a crack shot. He could pick a fly off a plate of grits at 100 yards in a deep fog. I was lying on my stomach with my nose about an inch from the tent wall. I can still recall the smell of that canvas tent after all of these years. The lantern was on low, giving off a warm yellow light, when I heard a deep growl immediately on the other side of the tent wall at nose level. I looked over to Fred, and he was in the process of waving me off as if to call my bluff, when we all heard it again, only much louder. I reached around and chambered a 12-gauge slug into my Model 12 Winchester, an unmistakable sound to just about anyone, and I looked at Fred. He nodded, and we both bailed out of the 6-foot-tall tent with Fred going right and me going left around the tent. We reached the back side of the tent at the same time, and there it was. It stood about 6'3" and was totally black with a cone-shaped head. We both immediately pulled up on the thing. My 12-gauge found a white spot on the chest area, and Fred's 12-gauge Savage found a spot as well. My finger had found the trigger well before I had brought the gun up, and my stock hit my shoulder. A pull of maybe 2/32 of an inch on the trigger would have discharged a rifle slug directly into the chest of some guy trying to play a trick on us. He was wearing a black hooded sweatshirt with a hood pulled over his head, and in the darkness he looked anything but human. Between Fred and I, we could have cut that dude directly in half. He raised his hand and he screamed, "Don't shoot!" I froze and carefully released my grip on the trigger. One of the other guys was standing behind me and to my right when his knees gave out and he hit the dirt, wide-eyed and dry-mouthed. We did not exchange pleasantries. I was shaking as I lowered my gun and thankful the adrenaline rush didn't push me to blowing a softball-sized hole through the man. I have no idea where he had come from. It was the middle of the night and we were not in a campground of any kind whatsoever. He laughed and walked off into the darkness shouting, "If you hear it again, shoot through the tent. It won't be me." Needless to say, some 30 years later, I would never ever remotely consider firing through the walls of a tent at an unknown target. The grizzlies tore our camp apart that night. Gear was strewn everywhere. A cooler filled with only ice was bitten through, but they didn't find the food strung up in a tree some 30 yards away, and nothing got shot. Thanks to the lonely pilgrim who almost met his maker some 30-odd years before. Dusty, I replied to your email and I told you what a great story that was, and I'm going to tell everybody what I think. That is an awesome story, and I kind of gave it away on the front end that it was a hoax gone bad, but dude, I admire your, what would you call that? Keeping your wits about you with a rifle, pistol, or a shotgun in your hand. That is a good lesson for anybody, and he learned it as a kid. don't squeeze the trigger on anything unless you know what you're going to shoot at. So, Dusty, thank you so much for taking the time to write that story. I know everybody that hears it has enjoyed it. Man, I hope you have a good weekend, and I hope you all have a great weekend. That's going to do it for this video, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.